AITA for refusing to cover my girlfriend's half of the rent after she quit her job on impulse. I have been with my girlfriend Sarah for about 3.5 years now, and we have been living together for the last 2 years. For the most part, things have been fine, not perfect, but fine. We have always split everything pretty much right down the middle when it comes to rent, utilities, groceries, and anything else related to our shared expenses. Neither of us is rolling in cash, but we make it work. I work full-time in a decently stable job, and she had a job in an office that she has always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with. She would complain about her coworkers, about her boss, about the general culture of the place, but it was a paycheck, and she kept going back. That is, until about a month ago. She came home from work that day in a mood I can only describe as absolutely seething. She stormed through the door, slammed her bag down, and started pacing back and forth in the living room like she was about to spontaneously combust. When I asked what was wrong, it was like opening the floodgates. She went off on this long rant about how her boss was a complete idiot, how her team was useless, how every project she was working on was a disaster, and how the whole environment was sucking the life out of her. I have heard variations of this rant before, so at first, I was just kind of listening and nodding along, assuming this was the usual vent session. But then, out of nowhere, she dropped the bombshell: she had quit. Not put in her notice, not started looking for other options, just quit. On the spot. No backup plan. Nothing lined up. Just quit. I was stunned, and I asked her what her plan was now. She shrugged like it was no big deal and said she would figure something out. That was the whole plan, figure something out. At first, I tried to be supportive, even though the whole impulsive nature of it set off some alarms in my head. I get that jobs can be miserable, and I do not think anyone should stay somewhere that is damaging their mental health, but at the same time, we have rent, bills, and responsibilities. Life does not pause just because you are fed up with your job. But I kept my mouth shut in a moment because she was so worked up, and I figured we could have a calm conversation about it later. Well, figuring it out never actually happened. For the first few days, I gave her space. I figured she would take a long weekend to decompress and then get serious about the job hunt on Monday. Monday came and went, and all she had done was apply to one job that she openly admitted she was not even interested in. Instead, she slept in until almost noon, made herself elaborate breakfasts, and settled into what can only be described as a vacation mindset. She binged entire seasons of shows, spent hours scrolling her phone, and when I gently asked how the job search was going, she would say things like, "I just need a little more time to reset," or "I am trying to figure out what I actually want to do next." All the while, I was still going to work every day, paying my half of the bills, and watching our joint expenses creep higher and higher because she was home all day using more electricity, more water, and ordering food deliveries because she did not feel like cooking. A couple of weeks into this, my patience was already starting to wear thin. I asked her if she had any kind of timeline in mind for getting serious about finding something new. She got defensive and said she just needed me to be supportive and not pressure her. I bit my tongue because I did not want to start a fight, but internally, I was getting really frustrated. It was not like she had a massive savings account to float her through unemployment. We both live pretty much paycheck to paycheck with only a little buffer, and I could already see that buffer draining fast. Then the first of the month rolled around. Rent was due, and I reminded her, just like I always do, because we usually both send our halves to the landlord separately. That is when she dropped another bomb on me: she did not have her half. She just casually told me she needed me to cover it this month until she got back on her feet. No apology, no real acknowledgement of how unfair that was, just a totally casual expectation that I would step up and take over her financial responsibilities. That was the moment something in me snapped. I asked her, point blank, when exactly she expected to get back on her feet, if she was not actively looking for jobs or making any serious effort to find income. She admitted, almost proudly, that she had not really been looking very hard. She said she needed more time to decompress because her old job had been so toxic that she was still processing it. That is when I told her, flat out, that I was not going to cover for her. I was not going to be the only one financially supporting us, especially when this entire situation was a result of her own impulsive decision to quit without a plan. She got really upset, accusing me of not supporting her and saying that if I really cared about her, I would want to help her through this difficult time. I told her I was willing to be supportive emotionally, but financial support was a different conversation. In my mind, being a team does not mean one person gets to make reckless decisions and then expects the other to just absorb all the consequences. A team means both people pull their weight, and right now, I am the only one doing any pulling. The conversation escalated from there. She said I was being selfish and transactional, and that she would never hesitate to help me if the roles were reversed. I pointed out that if I quit my job tomorrow with no warning, no savings, and no plan, I would expect her to be just as frustrated with me as I am with her right now. She brushed that off, saying it was different because she was unhappy and needed to prioritize her mental health. I told her that prioritizing her mental health does not mean checking out of adult responsibilities entirely and expecting me to carry everything. Since then, things have been incredibly tense between us. She has been cold and distant, and every interaction feels strained. I feel like I am being painted as the villain for refusing to just take on her financial burden indefinitely. I did not sign up to be anyone's financial safety net, especially not when the whole situation was entirely preventable. I understand needing a break. I understand needing to leave a toxic job. What I do not understand is making a unilateral decision that directly impacts both of us and then expecting me to clean up the mess without question. Now I am wondering if I was too harsh, or if I should have just sucked it up and covered for her temporarily to keep the peace. But at the same time, I cannot shake the feeling that I am being taken advantage of. Am I the asshole? Update 1. After I wrote my original post, I spent a lot of time thinking about everything. The tension in the apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife, and honestly, I was exhausted. Every conversation with Sarah felt like walking into a minefield. One wrong step, one offhand comment about money, work, or anything remotely related to adult responsibilities, and she would either snap at me or withdraw completely. But underneath all of that frustration, there was still a part of me that wanted to fix this. I didn't want our relationship to become a constant battle over money and resentment. We were supposed to be partners, and even though I was angry, I still felt like if we were in this together, we should at least try to work through it together. So I decided to be proactive. If Sarah wasn't going to take the lead in figuring out her next steps, then I would at least try to help her get started. One evening after work, I sat down with her old resume, if you could even call it that, since the last time she touched it was years ago, and I rebuilt it from scratch. I added in all her recent experience, polished up the descriptions to make them sound more professional, and made sure it was actually formatted in a way that wouldn't make recruiters' eyes bleed. Then I went into her long-forgotten LinkedIn account, updated her work history, added some skills, filled in her profile photo, and even connected her with a few people from her old jobs. I doubt she had even logged into LinkedIn more than once or twice in the last few years, and the state of her profile made that pretty obvious. I didn't stop there. I set her up on several job search sites, created profiles for her, uploaded her resume, and even customized a few saved searches so she could get alerts for jobs that actually matched her skills. I was trying to make it as easy as possible for her. All she would have to do was check her email and click apply. I really thought this would help. I thought if I took the burden of the process off her shoulders, she would feel less overwhelmed and actually start engaging with it. At first, she seemed touched. She said it was sweet that I was helping her, and for a brief moment, I thought we had turned a corner. That optimism didn't last long. What started as appreciation very quickly turned into irritation. Every time I gently suggested that she follow up on something, every time I nudged her to respond to a recruiter message or apply to a job I found, her whole mood shifted. It was like I was poking a bear with a stick. She would sigh loudly, roll her eyes, and make excuses about how she wasn't sure if the job was the right fit or how she wasn't in the right headspace that day. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I didn't want to be overbearing, and I knew the transition from being employed to job hunting was tough. But it became clear pretty quickly that this wasn't just about her needing a bit of time. It was full-blown resistance. She didn't want any job. She started talking more and more about how she couldn't stomach the idea of going back to an office, how she felt like working a traditional job was soul-crushing, and how she needed time to figure out her passion, which, by the way, was a passion she couldn't actually identify. It was all vague, undefined, and open-ended. The more I tried to gently guide her toward at least getting something temporary, freelance work, part-time, even remote admin jobs, the more she dug in her heels. It was like any suggestion that involved effort or responsibility instantly triggered a wall of excuses. At that point, I realized that this wasn't going to be a quick fix. This wasn't just burnout or needing a career change, this was her fully rejecting the concept of working altogether, at least for now. And the worst part was, I was the only one expected to keep us afloat while she figured it out. I sat down and told her directly that I was willing to cover her half of the rent and bills for another month, but I was going to keep track of everything I paid for. It wasn't an ultimatum, it wasn't a threat, it wasn't me turning into some cold-hearted landlord, it was just reality. I started writing down every bill I paid on her behalf, every grocery run I covered, every little expense I absorbed so that we could revisit it later when she was back on her feet. She was stunned. Absolutely floored. Her face went pale, and she just stared at me like I had said something unforgivable. She asked if I was seriously keeping a ledger of everything I spent on her, and I said yes. I said it was the only way to be fair to both of us. I wasn't doing it to punish her, I was doing it so we could be honest and transparent when things stabilized. That was the moment everything shifted between us. She said there should be no debt in a relationship, that couples should want to help each other out without keeping score. She said I was treating her like a bad roommate instead of my girlfriend, and that the fact I was tracking every penny made her feel like a burden instead of a partner. I told her that love doesn't cancel responsibility, but it doesn't seem to resonate. Update 2. In the days after my last update, the tension between Sarah and me didn't ease. If anything, it thickened into something heavier, something that made even the silence between us feel hostile. Every interaction was perfunctory, every conversation laced with unspoken accusations. I was the villain in her eyes, the heartless partner who didn't understand her, who measured love in bills and receipts. And I'll admit, I started to wonder if I had gone too far. I replayed the conversations in my head, the way I laid out my spreadsheets and expense logs like some obsessive accountant, and I could see how it might have felt cold. Clinical. Like a transaction instead of a relationship. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the facts. We lived in the real world, where the rent doesn't wait for self-discovery, and the electricity doesn't stay on just because you're tired. I didn't want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to spend every day chasing her to act like an adult while I played the role of the responsible, boring provider. So I decided to try something different. If direct conversations and logical explanations weren't working, maybe I needed to show her that work didn't have to be a soul-crushing, spirit-breaking experience. I wanted her to see that not every job was like her last one, that there were options out there that could fit her skills without destroying her sanity. That was how I came up with the idea. I created a fake email account. It was stupid, and I knew it was manipulative even as I was doing it, but I was desperate. I made up a name, used a generic corporate-sounding email address, and drafted an email from a recruiter reaching out to her directly. I tailored the job description so carefully it felt ridiculous, it matched her past experience almost perfectly, but with a few strategic tweaks. A better salary, some flexibility to work part-time from home, and a description that highlighted things she had always said she wanted: autonomy, creativity, a team that valued her input. It was the kind of job I thought she might actually feel excited about if it landed in her lap, free of the pressure and baggage of me being the one to suggest it. I sent it and waited. I didn't mention it right away because I wanted her reaction to be genuine. I wanted to see if a door could open for her if she believed, even for a second, that the universe was offering her a fresh start. For a while, she didn't say anything, and I assumed she had either ignored it or hadn't checked her email. Then, by complete accident, I brought it up. I don't even remember how. I might have made some offhand comment about how the job market wasn't so bad if recruiters were already reaching out to her. As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I had fucked up. Her whole posture changed in an instant, like I'd flipped a switch. She demanded to know how I knew about the email, why I was even aware of it, and I stumbled through some half-baked excuse about us living together and both being involved in the job search. She wasn't buying it. Her face twisted into something that wasn't just anger, but hurt, deep, personal hurt. She told me, with venom in her voice, that she felt like I was surrounding her with pressure from all sides. That it wasn't just the bills or the job suggestions, but the constant presence of me looming over her, evaluating her every move, waiting for her to prove she was pulling her weight. She said I had turned into her own personal toxic manager, right there in our home. She said she felt watched, monitored, and graded, like her existence had become a performance review and I was holding a clipboard with all her failures marked down in neat little bullet points. I tried to interrupt, to tell her that wasn't what I meant, but she steamrolled right over me, telling me she didn't want to live in a relationship where every conversation circled back to her productivity. Where she felt like she had to justify every hour she spent not job hunting, like she was some lazy teenager who couldn't be trusted to manage her own life. Then she said the part that really hit me. She said she didn't understand why I was so obsessed with getting her back to work instead of just accepting her as she was, a person who was tired, who needed a break, who wanted to find herself instead of jumping back into a life she wasn't even sure she wanted. She said it like I was the unreasonable one, like expecting a grown adult to contribute to the life they were living was some archaic, outdated belief system I was clinging to. And I saw, in that moment, that we weren't just fighting about money. This wasn't really about rent or spreadsheets or even jobs. It was about control. It was about the fundamental divide between us, how I saw life as something you had to push through, even when it sucked, while she saw it as something you could pause and reconsider whenever it got uncomfortable. I wish I could say I responded with patience and empathy. I didn't. Something in me just snapped. All the frustration, all the resentment, all the quiet, seething irritation I'd been trying to swallow for weeks just boiled over. I told her, in a voice sharper than I intended, that she could accept herself however she wanted, wherever she wanted, but she had to pay for herself if that's the path she was choosing. It wasn't the wisest argument, but at that moment I was just blown away. Update 3. The culmination of everything, all the stress, the arguments, the resentment building under the surface like a slow leak in a dam, finally hit one random Tuesday evening. I came home from work, exhausted and already bracing myself for the usual tense silence or passive-aggressive commentary that had become the soundtrack of our apartment. But instead of finding Sarah curled up on the couch with some mindless show playing in the background, I found her sitting there, laptop balanced on her knees, her face streaked with tears. For a split second, my stomach dropped, assuming it was yet another fight brewing, another round of deflection and defensiveness, but then I noticed what was actually on her screen, an open job search site. It was the first time in weeks, maybe months, that I had seen her even glance at anything work-related voluntarily. At first, I didn't know what to say, but it turned out I didn't need to say anything. She told me, between sniffles and little half-laughs at her own expense, that her best friend, the same one who had been her biggest cheerleader in the whole find yourself journey, had just landed a new job. It wasn't just any job, either. It was fully remote, the kind of flexible, well-paid position Sarah had spent so much time dreaming about but had fully convinced herself didn't actually exist. Her friend sent her the link, saying it reminded her of Sarah's skills and background, and added one simple line, "You should try, this could be a sign." At first, Sarah resisted. She told herself it was pointless, that jobs like that didn't fall from the sky and definitely not for people like her, people who quit their jobs in a rage spiral and spent the next few months trying to justify it to themselves and everyone around them. But something about seeing her friend, the person who had spent so much time validating her need to pause, to rest, to reevaluate, suddenly move forward triggered something she hadn't expected. There was no judgment in her friend's message, no pressure, but there was a shift in tone, a subtle signal that said, "I'm moving forward, what about you?" Sarah admitted, in a rare moment of unfiltered honesty, that she filled out the application more out of spite than hope. It was almost performative, a way to prove to herself and to me that she was right, that these so-called dream jobs were a myth, that nothing would come of it, and that she was fully justified in staying where she was, floating in uncertainty. But the universe, in one of those cruelly ironic twists, didn't play along. She got a response almost immediately. Not an automated rejection, not a ghosting, but an actual reply from an actual person inviting her to interview. A week later, she got the offer. It wasn't the perfect dream job, the kind where every day feels fulfilling and every task aligns with some higher personal calling. But it was damn close. Part-time to start, with the option to go full-time if she wanted. Fully remote, flexible hours, a team that actually seemed collaborative instead of combative, and, the cherry on top, a salary higher than what she was making at her old toxic office job. It was everything she had spent so long convincing herself didn't exist, showing up in her inbox at the exact moment she had almost fully given up. With the job offer came a shift, not just in our finances, but in the atmosphere between us. There was still tension, but now it was the kind that comes from trying to rebuild something cracked but not fully broken. We were cautious with each other, both aware that the damage from the last few months wasn't going to vanish overnight, but for the first time in what felt like forever, we were on the same side again. She admitted, with more vulnerability than I'd seen from her in a long time, that she had been wrong to shove everything onto me, to expect me to absorb all the stress and responsibility while she drifted through her existential fog. She said she hadn't realized just how much she was asking of me until she saw, plain as day, that even her closest friend had moved forward instead of pausing indefinitely. And in that same spirit of honesty, I admitted something too, that I'd been too strict, too rigid, and that I had started to see her less as my partner and more as a financial liability I needed to manage. I told her that the resentment hadn't come from nowhere, but that I could see how my constant tracking and ledger-keeping had made her feel like a problem to be solved instead of a person I loved. It wasn't an easy conversation, and it wasn't some neat, cinematic reconciliation where all the tension evaporated the second we opened up to each other, but it was real, and it was necessary. One of the most surprising parts of all of this was what came next. I had assumed, after all the fights about money and fairness, that even bringing up the idea of repaying what I had covered would be opening a fresh wound. But before I could even raise the topic, Sarah did. She said she wanted to set up a clear plan to repay her share of the expenses I had covered during her unemployment. Not as some formal debt, not with interest or deadlines, but as a way to restore balance, not just to our bank accounts, but to how we saw each other. She said she wanted us to feel like equals again, and part of that meant acknowledging that while she needed help, that help came at a cost, and it was only fair to even the scales. We sat down together, went through every bill, every receipt, every transfer I had made on her behalf, and created a shared document, not a ledger, not a scorecard, but a transparent record of what we owed each other. It was the first time in our entire relationship that we had talked about money this openly, with no sugarcoating, no dodging, no vague promises that it would all work out eventually. And it felt good. Uncomfortable, sometimes awkward, but good. It felt like something we should have done years ago, long before any of this spiraled into resentment and passive-aggressive tally-keeping. For the first time in 3.5 years, we weren't just talking about money in abstract terms. We were talking about our future, how we wanted to handle emergencies, how we wanted to make decisions together instead of in isolation, and how we could avoid ever ending up in a situation where one of us felt completely alone in the face of shared responsibility. It's not perfect now, and it probably never will be, but there's a sense that we've both seen the ugliest, most selfish versions of each other and still decided to stay. That counts for something. I hope it stays that way.